The art was priceless. The theft was simple. A two-bit crook may hold the key, but the greatest art heist in history may never be solved. St. Patrick's Day weekend, 1990. In a city like Boston, the holiday provides every excuse for a proper binge.
You know, it's just Happy St. Patty's Day.
At 1 a.m. on Sunday, many were still partying. Others had jobs to do. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, two art students, moonlighting as security guards for $6.85 an hour, had the place to themselves. The safety of 2,500 world masterpieces was in their hands. And on this night, March 18th, some of those treasures would slip through their fingers. Though the Gardner Museum had been retrofitted with video surveillance, an alarm system, and infrared sensors, the building wasn't designed with security in mind.
The thing that struck me the most about it was that it was inherently a very difficult place to secure. It's a mansion. It was built well over 100 years ago.
Even so, no one had ever tried to break in or steal any of the Gardner's treasures. The guards had no reason to believe tonight would be any different. This was just another night of easy work. One man watched the monitors, ready to press the panic button at the first hint of trouble. The other patrolled the floor and reported back. It was a simple, effective routine. But the men who came to rob the Gardner had an effective routine of their own.
Open the door, Boston PD!
The guard, surprised at the pounding, was doubly surprised to see it was the police.
Bob, can I get you to come on down here?
10-4, copy that.
Something kind of odd going on.
Roger, I'll be right there, I'm on my way.
The officer told the bewildered guard that someone from the museum had reported a disturbance.
I didn't report any disturbance here.
The guard tried to convince the officers that everything was in order. The police insisted on checking out the museum themselves.
The criminal plan of the thieves, using the two bogus police officers to enter the Gardner Museum, was quite simple and quite easily executed. The Gardner Museum could have been as secure as Fort Knox, but that does no good if the guard's going to let the thief in.
Even the most finely tuned security system can be undone by the simplest human miscalculation. Once the entrance was breached, the chain of events was set into motion. The officers deftly caught the men off guard by demanding to see their identification.
How do we know you're not the disturbance? Why are you inside me right now?
The young men hardly knew what hit them. In a flash, they were incapacitated and hauled to the basement.
Take it easy.
Get your hand up there. Shut up! Get your hand up there!
Help!
Shut up!
The guard, lured from his post, had had no time to press the panic button. No alarm had been tripped. The intruders must have known about the surveillance system because they quickly put it out of commission. They turned the cameras to face the wall and dismantled the printer that recorded activity from the sensors in every room.
It was well planned. They knew how many guards were on duty. They knew where the videotape machine was and to take the tape.
The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was now under their complete control. It was just after 2. The dangerous part was over. No one knew the intruders were in the museum, and the morning guard wasn't due until 7. That gave them hours to perform their illicit task. As bold as the thieves were, they didn't make the most of their opportunity.
They had the whole museum to themselves in the dark of night. They could have pulled a truck up and removed $1 billion worth of art, and instead they took a few valuable things and left behind an extraordinarily valuable assortment of paintings that, fortunately, are still there.
Despite their expertise at breaking in, they seemed somewhat at a loss for which pieces to take or how to take them. Rembrandt's only seascape, Storm on the Sea of Galilee, was sliced out of its frame with a dull knife. The same fate awaited Rembrandt's Lady and Gentleman in Black. They also took a painting by Vermeer. In their assault of the Gardner, they helped themselves to a small self-portrait of Rembrandt and some less valuable works, including a 3,000-year-old Chinese vessel and the finial from a Napoleonic battle flag. There seemed no rhyme or reason behind the choices they made. The sensors in each room indicated they'd spent 2 hours moving about the museum. Given that amount of time, the devastation of the paintings was all the more senseless.
Although it's considered by many people the art crime of the century, and in terms of value and in terms of sort of impact it is, if you look at the details of it, it was also a botched crime. It was a crime in which a lot of good works of art that were there for the taking were missed, and artwork that was taken was cut from its frames, which is obviously not something you want to do with irreplaceable Rembrandts.
The thieves' behavior suggested they weren't acting alone.
What I suspect from that is that the robbers were recruited as robbers. My guess is they'd never done an art theft before. I very much suspect that there were other people behind the theft besides the 2 bogus police officers.
When it was over, the thieves made off with 13 objects, estimated worth $200 to $300 million. Sunday morning, 7 a.m., March 18th, 1990. The daytime guard at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was puzzled when the night guards didn't come to the door. He waited until the maintenance man arrived. Neither had a key.
They call it a security deposit or some stuff, right?
They knew something wasn't right. Where were the guards? The museum's head of security arrived to let them in. His quick inspection of the rooms revealed no guards, missing artwork, and big trouble. He rushed to call the police. After their rescue, the guards gave their accounts of the night before. But it all happened too fast. Their descriptions of the thieves were hopelessly sketchy. Police sought better clues elsewhere in the museum. The thieves had been sloppy in removing the art. Detectives hoped they had been careless enough to leave a fingerprint or more. But no traces of their identities remained. Investigators would have to widen the search.
After an art theft takes place, there are several things you do, and 2 important things which come to mind are, number 1, to look to your network of underworld informants, and number 2, to try to catch up with the stolen objects and use them to work your way back toward the thieves.
Though the Gardner Museum and all its treasures are private property, art theft is a federal crime, the FBI's domain. Agents wasted no time comparing this theft to similar ones and gathering a list of suspects. They trusted that their network of informants would bring some other names to light. A heist this big couldn't stay secret. The small museum offered a $1 million reward for any information leading to the return of the artwork, an unprecedented sum 4 times higher than any reward ever offered. But then, this was the biggest art theft of all time. If stolen artwork isn't recovered within a few days, it can vanish for decades, or forever, as it's sold to unwitting buyers and ends up in private collections. Agents needed to cover a lot of ground very quickly. They visited galleries and auction houses to see what they could find in terms of tangible goods or idle gossip. Despite all their efforts, they found nothing. That wasn't entirely surprising. Some paintings are simply too conspicuous to sell.
I think we have to ask ourselves why at the high end they would bother with a Vermeer painting, which most people would call unfensible. No criminal would touch it because there's only 30-some-odd Vermeers in the world, and therefore they're very noticeable. It's like everybody knows where each one of them is supposed to be.
Sometimes famous works are stolen simply in order to ransom them back to the museum for the insurance or reward money. If that was the robbers' game, they had wasted their efforts. Though the $1 million reward was only a fraction of the art's value, the museum was unable to increase it. Then it shocked everyone when it revealed that the artwork wasn't even insured.
And I begin with a bid of $500,000.
Throughout the 80s, art prices skyrocketed. So did insurance premiums. The Gardner simply couldn't afford the coverage its collection deserved. Without insurance, the museum could offer no more incentive for the return of the art. The reward money did appeal to tipsters. One informant mentioned the name of a man with mob connections and his partner. But when agents tracked them down, they learned that one had been found in the trunk of a Cadillac, tied up, stabbed multiple times, and with a plastic bag over his head. The other had died of heart disease. Authorities were literally at a dead end. The clock was running. Authorities believed the art would keep changing hands between shady sellers and naive buyers, erasing the trail of the real thieves. As the months crept by, authorities feared that the Gardner Hall was destined to be part of the 75% of stolen art that is never recovered. Then, 7 years after the crime in 1997, the FBI convinced the museum's supporters to pool their resources, enabling the desperate Gardner Museum to increase the reward from $1 million to $5 million. The statute of limitations on the crime had expired 2 years earlier. The time was ripe for something to happen. While researching an unrelated story, Boston Herald reporter Tom Mashberg got a tip that a man named Miles Connor was involved with the Gardner caper.
Now, if you're from Massachusetts or you're familiar with any of the sort of recent crime lore of the Boston area, the one name that rings a lot of bells is Miles Connor. Miles is sort of famous for being a very successful art thief. Well, I guess he's not that successful because he spent a lot of time in jail.
In fact, Connor was in prison when the Gardner heist occurred. Mashberg learned that he had a friend, William Youngworth. Youngworth was an antiques dealer with 11 aliases and a 10-page felony record. He was under investigation by the FBI for firearms and drug charges. Youngworth also had in his possession a museum piece that authorities knew Connor had stolen years earlier. Mashberg started writing about Youngworth's connection to Connor and possibly to the Gardner crime. Youngworth wasn't happy about it.
Well, after 2 or 3 articles appeared in which we really put some pressure on him and caused him a lot of sort of discomfort by putting his name out in the public arena, he called me up directly at the paper and yelled at me and told me to stop writing all these lies about him.
But as they talked, Youngworth must have realized that the press, and especially Mashberg, could be his greatest ally. On August 18, 1997, Mashberg received an anonymous call asking him to meet a stranger in the middle of the night. Mashberg knew this had something to do with Youngworth and the art.
So I met that person, and we took a long, circuitous drive through a dark warehouse district somewhere within an hour's drive of Boston.
Youngworth had said he could broker the return of the artwork in exchange for the reward money and immunity from prosecution. Mashberg told him that authorities needed proof that he really had access to the paintings. This was Youngworth's way of providing the proof. He arranged for Mashberg to see Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee.
And the person shone the flashlight right on the signature as if to sort of say, ta-da, see, here it is. The signature Rembrandt that proves that we have the art.
That's it. I didn't really get to see it.
And I only got to look at it for about 30 seconds.
Show's over.
The painting was quickly returned to its tube. Mashberg was escorted out of the warehouse and into a waiting cab. He agreed to sit on the story for 10 days until the paintings could be moved elsewhere. Mashberg is convinced he saw the real thing.
But the reason why I don't believe it was a fraudulent painting is very simple. There's no way on earth that the Gardner would give $5 million for a fraudulent painting. The only way they would give the $5 million is if the painting could be authenticated. And if the painting was a fraud, what was the point of showing it to me, other than to fool me? There was no point in that.
Mashberg broke the story 10 days later. He wrote that Youngworth could broker the return of the art in exchange for the $5 million reward, his own immunity, and Connor's early release from prison. Deals like that were becoming Miles Connor's trademark. It wouldn't be the first time Connor used stolen art to buy his freedom. In 1975, he brokered the return of a Rembrandt stolen from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts years earlier.
It occurred to him that he might be able to leverage himself out of this problem with the law and get himself less jail time if he could be responsible for helping return a piece of stolen art. Well, of course, he stole the art first and then returned it, which is not exactly what I suppose the authorities have in mind. And in exchange for the return of the painting, he was given a far shorter sentence.
That audacious plan had worked in 1975, and it looked like Connor and Youngworth were about to try it again, using the stolen Gardner art. Connor still had 3 years of a 10-year sentence, and Youngworth was facing prison time of his own. Connor told Mashberg that he and 2 accomplices had cased the Gardner years earlier and had seen how lax the security was. In fact, Connor boasted that one of his men had unlocked a window. He returned every few months to find it remained unlocked. According to Connor, while he and Youngworth sat in prison, their 2 partners may have continued planning the Gardner Museum heist without them and then pulled it off. But they lacked Connor's eye and his respect for the artwork.
It seems like the people who went in were people who were following the kind of plan that Connor would have organized, but without him there, they sort of freelanced as they went along. So they broke glass here to get at paintings, they cut other paintings out, and they ended up not taking all the best or most valuable items.
Connor had told authorities that he knew who stole the Gardner's art. They were the same men he cased the museum with years earlier. One of them, William Houghton, was also the custodian of Connor's extensive art collection whenever Connor was doing time. It wasn't the first time agents heard Houghton's name. He was one of the dead-end leads the FBI had followed earlier in the investigation. Perhaps it wasn't such a dead end after all. After Houghton's death, Youngworth became the next in line to hold Miles Connor's artwork. He had it moved from Houghton's storage unit. Connor alleged that Youngworth unintentionally picked up some of Houghton's plunder at the same time. The Gardner art was among it. That would explain how it fell innocently into Youngworth's hands. In their minds, that entitled them to the reward, since they were willing to help recover it. To the FBI, Connor and Youngworth's plan sounded like extortion. One flashlit peek by a newspaper reporter was hardly enough to motivate stroking a $5 million check and springing two felons.
Come on, I didn't really get to see it.
There would be no immunity granted until Connor and Youngworth could prove they had the real thing and prove they weren't directly responsible for stealing it. The case of the missing Gardner masterpieces was at a stalemate. Connor refused to provide any more information, and Youngworth wouldn't talk unless he and Connor were granted immunity. The FBI refused unless the two could prove they could get the art. In October 1997, that proof arrived in Tom Mashberg's office. A small quantity of paint chips and some photographs of the stolen Rembrandts. The negatives were scrutinized. The Herald's photo lab determined that they weren't doctored. The FBI agreed, but said they were photos of reproductions, not the real paintings. The paint chips were sent to a forgery expert for verification.
So he looked at the paint chips and he said that there was no way on earth they could be anything but from the era of Rembrandt, which is to say that they were paint chips from the 1600s from a specific region in the Netherlands where Rembrandt, Vermeer, and some of the other Dutch masters got their paint and painted their works. So that was a very good indication that the paint chips were authentic.
Connor and Youngworth hoped this would be proof enough. It wasn't. When the FBI tested the chips, they determined that they didn't match the ones left at the scene of the crime. Agents had no way to test them against the missing Vermeer, which they may actually have been from. The case was back to square one.
Everybody had a different agenda. The criminal's agenda was to get the $5 million reward. My agenda as a journalist was to get a good story. The Gardner's agenda, of course, was to get its art back. But the feds and their agenda was to make an arrest, to solve the crime.
They required more and more proof, eventually asking Connor and Youngworth to present one of the stolen pieces.
Well, when we talked to the lawyers said that that would be foolhardy, because the minute Youngworth or somebody associated with him produced an item, they would swoop in, they would arrest him, they would indict him for extortion, and the story would fall apart.
Connor and Youngworth didn't take the bait, and the negotiations, so promising a few weeks earlier, now began to break down. Connor insisted that the window of opportunity was closing. The time to act was now. But the FBI held its ground, demanding more proof. The two sides were at loggerheads. Communications stopped. In the end, everyone lost. Connor served his full sentence, and Youngworth went back to prison on unrelated charges. Neither would see a penny of the $5 million reward. In the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, empty frames hang on the wall, garnering as much notice, perhaps, as the artwork they once contained. The only winner, it seems, is Tom Mashberg, who got his good story after all, even if it's a tragedy.
I think that the offer was genuine, and had everybody just followed through by granting the criminals immunity and by guaranteeing the transfer of the reward money, I think those paintings would have been returned.
The possibility remains that Youngworth and Connor never really had the paintings at all. Officially, the crime is still unsolved. Removed from the rarefied atmosphere of a museum, it's likely that the paintings may no longer exist or are damaged beyond all repair. The Gardner's stolen treasures may be lost to the entire world. He was the cat burglar to the stars, targeting the best homes to steal only the finest silver. The hunt was on to catch a polished criminal with a sterling reputation. In the summer of 1995, a crime wave hit the wealthy enclave of Greenwich, Connecticut. The crime wave was triggered by one man, a master thief.
He would specifically target these homes at night between the hours of, say, midnight and 5 a.m. He would make entry by means of taking out parts of doors or windows which would not compromise the perimeter alarm if in fact the house had one.
Greenwich is home to the likes of David Letterman and Martha Stewart. The average estate is worth $1.25 million. More than 3/4 of the homes in Greenwich have burglar alarms, but that didn't stop the burglar. The burglar didn't care whether anyone was home. While the occupant slept just steps away, he went to work. No one ever confronted him, yet sometimes he was spotted. The witnesses never betrayed him. They were the family pets.
Animals don't alert to him. And I find that kind of far-fetched and hard to believe, but I have gone on burglaries where those particular residences did have dogs, and the homeowners weren't aware of those dogs barking at all during the night.
The burglar could have taken anything he wanted: cash, jewels, rare coins. Instead, he zeroed in on one thing: pure sterling silver. More than 95% of all burglaries are committed by petty thieves and drug addicts. They make clumsy break-ins and take what they can get.
With these burglaries, however, we knew we weren't dealing with some junkie. The person had the presence of mind just to take the sterling silver. In other words, he had one target in mind, and even though other things might have been available, he had the discipline just to take the sterling silver.
He had a collector's eye. Among his thefts, he made off with a set of sterling silver spoons worth more than $600, a serving dish worth $20,000, a coffee service worth more than $50,000. Anything that wasn't pure silver, he left behind. He left the police even less. No fingerprints, no clues, nothing. The first burglary occurred on August 13th, 1995.
Secretary table, they took a vase, it was right here, very expensive one. Okay.
2 more followed the same week. Each time, the burglar made off with sterling silver. Then, just as the toll of loot reached $100,000, the burglaries stopped as mysteriously as they began.
I can't believe this.
Almost 9 months to a year went on until we saw another one. And once again, we started experiencing this distinctive MO. At that point, we realized this got to be linked to our other jobs in '95.
The silver thief returned to Greenwich in May 1996. This time, he set his sights on the rich and famous, the $15 million mansion of Ivana Trump, former wife of New York billionaire Donald Trump. While Ivana was vacationing in Florida, the burglar climbed through a window and got away with more than $150,000 worth of sterling silver. Just 4 days later, the burglar targeted Ivana's neighbor. As usual, he took time to appraise his haul. He left behind some knives with stainless steel blades. He made off with 110 place settings of silverware. Total value, more than $200,000. During the burglary, the maid was sleeping upstairs. She never heard a thing.
And then it looks like this is where he exited from? Right over there?
Okay.
The next morning, she found a silver platter on the floor in the dining room.
Doesn't look like
It was too big for the hole the burglar had cut in the window.
We've had our normal delivery.
That was when she realized the house had been robbed.
And you haven't seen any strange vehicles going by or a vehicle going down the street here going really
By now, the burglar's loot totaled $450,000.
Very quiet and
The 2 detectives working the case still had no leads. After 6 silver thefts, Greenwich was on the alert, but publicity didn't intimidate the burglar. No one was ever harmed during the thefts. But the victims were still distraught.
Because we work all these burglaries, we come to an understanding that the people are in fact affected themselves. It might not be a physical confrontation, but it might be some type of psychological damage because their personal space has been invaded and been compromised.
All the while, the silver thief grew more daring. When he ran into an especially tough alarm system, he cut the phone line that linked it to the security company. On August 24th, 1996, the silver thief committed his 7th burglary in Greenwich. The thief had almost finished when around 5 a.m., the butler heard a noise on the intercom.
Hey, you! Hey! Where are you going? What?
The butler never saw his face.
Oh, my God.
Gentlemen, I was startled.
The butler described the thief as a small, trim man.
Just bolted out this window.
That was all detectives had to go on.
Ran out to the back of the yard in that direction.
They searched the grounds of the estate, but they were too late. The burglar escaped with more than $100,000 worth of silver. None of his loot ever surfaced among local fences. The Greenwich detectives surmised he shipped the silver to an accomplice in another state. In 7 burglaries, his haul totaled over $500,000 in silver. Detectives waited for the 8th burglary. It didn't come. The case seemed headed for the unsolved files. Then, they got their first break.
One day, my partner in the burglary squad was reading one of the local newspapers, and he read an article about how in the Hamptons of Long Island, an affluent beach community, a burglary had taken place where sterling silver was the sole item taken from this home.
Be sure to find out.
Detectives phoned the police department in the Hamptons. They directed them to a prosecutor in Monmouth County, New Jersey. The prosecutor supplied a name: Blaine David Nordell. The child of a broken home, Nordell had enlisted in the Navy in the late 1980s, but soon went AWOL shortly thereafter. He embarked on a string of nickel-and-dime burglaries. In 1991, he left a clue at the scene of the crime.
One of our forensic technicians found on a countertop a sneaker print. Forensically secured that sneaker print, and when he was arrested, Mr. Nordell had a pair of sneakers which perfectly matched that sneaker print.
When police connected Nordell to a whole string of burglaries, he threw in the towel. He confessed his crimes and named his fences in return for a shorter sentence. Nordell was convicted of 42 burglaries and got 4 years in prison. When the detectives from New Jersey and Connecticut compared notes, they found the identical M.O. They concluded they were looking for the same guy. But when they saw how widespread the robberies were, they sent out a nationwide bulletin. Police in Pennsylvania and Rhode Island replied. They suspected Nordell had been there too.
We've all got.
Calls poured in from across the country as investigators of unsolved burglaries spotted the same pattern. In Illinois, 11 estates on Chicago's exclusive North Shore were hit. Another 50 silver burglaries had occurred in New York and New Jersey, including the estate of rocker Bruce Springsteen. Authorities nicknamed Nordell the burglar to the stars.
When you're the burglar to the stars, you gain a certain notoriety, which is good if you like celebrity status, but not so good if you're a burglar, because certainly then you'll be able to be easily identified, especially for the guys like us who are looking for you to put you behind bars.
Putting Nordell behind bars wouldn't be so easy. To avoid the mistake that got him convicted in '91, he trashed his tools, clothes, and sneakers after each burglary.
Nordell clearly wasn't a typical burglar. He was neat. He was fairly clean about his burglaries. He was fastidious about the items that he would take, selective. He was a professional burglar, as best you can describe it.
Detectives had a suspect, but no proof. Then they got their second break. They found out their guy had a girlfriend.
Our detectives had built up a relationship with the girlfriend of Blaine David Nordell. She decided to cooperate because she thought it was in the best interest of Blaine that he finally be caught.
And during this time, you didn't see
Nordell's
anything unusual, you didn't have
girlfriend
any
claimed he
trouble.
wasn't a typical criminal. He was a nice guy who didn't drink, didn't smoke, and didn't do drugs. He just had a thing for silver.
With any drugs.
She told the police how Nordell pulled off his heists. He targeted his victims by reading about the layout of their homes in upscale magazines like Town and Country and Architectural Digest. The girlfriend even drove around with the Greenwich police and identified the houses Nordell said he had robbed. She also confirmed that Nordell usually shipped his loot out of the state. Then, she gave detectives their biggest break yet. She revealed Nordell had stayed at a motel in Greenwich during the time of the burglaries. Detectives decided to check her story.
Can I help you?
They needed a motel log with Nordell's signature and the dates May 5th through May 13th, the nights of the burglaries.
Yes, I have a Mr. Nordahl registered.
Pay dirt. That was the evidence they needed to subpoena Nordell's credit card records.
When was the last time you saw?
Detectives uncovered a paper trail of receipts up and down the East Coast and across the Midwest. Since Nordell had crossed state lines, it was now a federal case. On October 8, 1996, the FBI followed the trail to Nordell's mother's house in Chesterton, Indiana.
Oh, FBI! Freeze!
Hey, yeah, we just had a runner here.
In minutes, police launched a manhunt. But once more, Nordell gave them the slip. When they searched the vehicle in the driveway, the FBI found another credit card receipt, this one in the name of David Price. The agents suspected Price was an alias used by Nordell. They searched computer databases and turned up a checking account and driver's license used by Nordell under his alias, Price. They also found Price had just rented a car. Armed with a license plate, police departments throughout the Midwest put out an all-points bulletin on the so-called Price. With no luck. A week later, and 300 miles away in Sparta, Wisconsin, an off-duty cop with an unusual head for numbers recognized the license tag. He phoned in the plate number to his department and decided to tail the driver. The police phoned back and confirmed the hunch. The car had been rented by the fugitive silver thief, Blaine David Nordell.
Please get out! Please get out! Please get out! Please get out!
The arrest warrant for Nordell ran to 32 pages. It included 6 counts of second-degree burglary and 6 counts of larceny. Because Nordell had committed a federal crime, he would be incarcerated in Brooklyn, pending trial in federal district court in New York. In his decade-long crime spree, Nordell never stopped doing his homework. In his car, police found a criminal's curriculum: how to launder money, tricks of the burglar alarm trade, new ID in America. They were the hallmark of a thief who tried to avoid making the same mistake twice and failed. Nordau's capture was due largely to the perseverance of the Greenwich detectives, so they got first crack at interviewing him.
First, do you want to start with?
They were amazed by the extent of his crimes.
Well, you can say I'm a perfectionist when it comes to my
We
work.
didn't have a real solid number in our heads aside from the ones he had done in Greenwich. As these interviews went on, it led to a substantial amount of burglaries being revealed, much more than we thought of initially. It led to 142 burglaries, which were perpetrated in 36 different jurisdictions in 9 different states.
Nordau was looking at 15 years in prison.
Mr. Nordau, true to form, indicated that he would cooperate with authorities to identify the individuals who he sold his property to. And the authorities were interested in who would buy these type of items, particularly the more expensive items that were taken from the very wealthy or the very famous. And they agreed to release Nordau with the anticipation that he continued to cooperate.
Nordau spent 20 months behind bars while awaiting sentencing.
Nordau, pack it up, your B&B.
About time.
Post date, domestic.
After making a plea bargain with prosecutors, Nordau was released on bail on June 18, 1998.
Around the corner.
He promised to go straight. 1 month after his release, a wave of burglaries struck Pennsylvania and Maryland. The only items stolen were sterling silver. In Baltimore alone, a dozen homes were hit for some $700,000 worth of sterling. Blaine David Nordau was back in business.
He changed his location. He moved to different parts of the country, but his occupation didn't change.
Police were certain Nordau was their man, but as usual, he left no clues behind. By enlisting police from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, the FBI kept Nordau under surveillance around the clock. For several weeks, they tracked him without result. Then, on November 16th, 1998, Maryland police tailed Nordau to a wealthy suburb of Baltimore.
Turn around. Hands up. On the deck. Face down. Arms out. Palms up.
If Nordau had gone straight, prosecutors would probably have let him off with time served. Now, he had 3 strikes against him. It looked like he was out of the game for good.
Bring a heel on your crotch. Heel on your crotch. Up.
But to the cop's surprise, Nordau didn't have any silver, just the tools of the trade.
Guy can't take a walk. Walk with me.
Police settled for a 4th-degree burglary charge. In the end, the misdemeanor turned into a felony. Nordau faced 10 years for committing a crime while on pre-trial release.
He's going to go back to what he knows after he's done his prison time, because after a while in our business you become a realist, and you realize that there's some people in the world that even if you snapped them a chalk line, they still couldn't walk a straight line.
If he outlives his sentence, Blaine David Nordau will be back on the street. Once more, the question will be whether he goes straight or lives up to his sterling reputation. Philip Johnson had a dead-end job and a 5-year plan to retire rich. One day, he hit the road with $20 million stolen dollars and vanished. In March of 1997, 33-year-old Philip Johnson worked as a courier guard for Loomis Fargo Armored Cars in Jacksonville, Florida. At every stop on their route, Johnson left the safety of the steel-plated truck. He checked for any suspicious activity. Then, Johnson entered the stores where merchants would fill bags with cash, checks, and coins. The tens and thousands of dollars Johnson collected made him a tempting target to any gunman. The guard remained completely vulnerable until he could make it back to the armored car. Meanwhile, the driver stayed in the truck cab behind the bulletproof glass with his doors locked. If anyone attacked, under no circumstances could the driver let Johnson back inside the truck. He would be stuck outside on his own. If clear, the driver would open the door. It was hazardous work without hazard pay. $7 an hour without health insurance, dental plan, pension, or overtime. But the dangerous job did have a benefit that Loomis Fargo never planned on giving. By the evening of March 29, 1997, the day before Easter, a plan 5 years in the making was about to be hatched.
Phil Johnson was motivated to pull the crime off by an extreme hatred for his employer, Loomis Fargo. He felt that he was underpaid, felt that other workers were underpaid, that the working conditions were not what they should have been at Loomis Fargo, and he was going to seek to make a change.
As their shift neared its end, Johnson's truck returned to the Loomis Fargo warehouse, fully loaded with cash and checks. The driver began the routine check-in. A security guard inside the fenced complex identified the courier guard and his truck. The day's load was particularly heavy. It was the Easter holiday weekend, and consumers crowded the stores. During their shift, Johnson and his driver had collected millions from the busy retailers. Even more cash waited in the company's vault. Each shift, the guards faced the temptation of handling hundreds of times more money than they would ever earn in a lifetime.
My daughter's recital.
Terry, James Brown, and Dan Smith worked inside the warehouse as vault guards. They had worked together with Johnson for 2 years.
Get inside and I'll toss you the money.
But a bond had never developed between the three. The courier did not share in the camaraderie of his co-workers. He was an outsider that kept to himself. By 6:30 that evening, the driver was finished for the day. He clocked out and went home for the night. However, company regulations required Johnson to stay on. As courier guard, he had to wait while the day's load was booked in.
Here you go, guys.
He had to help store the money.
Another card. I need to go to your new models like yours.
These were the last moments that he would follow company procedure. Near 7 o'clock, when all the others had left, Johnson broke his routine of 10 years. He retrieved a bag from his car and sprang into action.
All right, that'll be good, man.
While the vault guards were busy, Johnson grabbed Smith's gun.
Turn your back. Hands up. Back against the
No,
wall.
what are you doing?
Shut up!
I mean, every
Come on out here. Hands up.
Bill, what the hell are you
Shut
doing?
up! Hands on the back of your head. Now!
You gotta
Now! Brown, down.
When asked
Get the
what he was
shackles out of the
doing,
bag.
Johnson told his coworkers it wasn't a joke. Then he ordered them to put shackles and handcuffs on and to lie down next to each other.
Speed it up. Take that. Shackle. Lie on the floor. Lie on your belly. Lie on your belly.
He took one of the company's unmarked vans and backed it into the vault area.
You guys comfortable?
Shackled on the floor, Smith and Brown could do nothing but fear for their fate. The vault offered Johnson cash in all denominations. He left the coins and small bills of 1s and 5s.
Don't move, boys.
He just took 10s or higher in unmarked, non-sequential bills. It was every crook's dream. With a half a ton of cash, the van took 2 hours to fill. But Johnson was in no hurry. He knew the next shift wasn't due till the morning.
All right, gentlemen, I want
At
you to
gunpoint, he moved the 2 bound guards into the back of the van.
Stay covered up.
Then he began cleaning up the crime scene. He moved the cars belonging to Smith, Brown, and himself out of the employee parking lot so no one would suspect they were still in the warehouse. Johnson then grabbed what the police would look for first, his personnel file. He also took the videotapes from the surveillance cameras. Last, he set the vault timer so that the door would not open until the next afternoon, Easter Sunday. Everything had gone according to his well-thought-out plan. Then, Johnson got careless.
Johnson, what are you doing? Get your head down. What are you looking at? Get your head down!
With Smith and Brown as hostages, he drove the van the short distance to his home.
Hold up. All right. Go. Walk. Looking forward.
What you doing, man?
Just hold on. Just, all right. You see the closet right there? Just right here.
This ain't necessary.
Put your hands on that pipe. Grab the pipe. All right?
What are you doing this for?
He handcuffed Brown to a closet pipe. He spoke about how unhappy he was in his job.
Johnson.
I'm not gonna hurt you. You'll be all right.
You just can't leave me like this.
Johnson returned to the van. He threw a blanket over the shackled Smith and threatened to kill him if he put up any struggle. Then, as they drove north, Johnson asked Smith why they hadn't been friends. He wanted to know why Smith hadn't ever asked him to go out for some pizza or for a beer. There wasn't much Smith could say.
He was a very quiet, withdrawn individual. He had been outspoken at times about his displeasure with Loomis Fargo, but yet he didn't really say what he wanted to do or where else he would go. I think he was just building up some frustration inside at that time over those years.
They drove all night, stopping only for gas. Sometime in the early morning, they stopped so Johnson could unload the money. Sitting in the van, covered by a blanket, Smith could discern little about their journey, except vague sounds, like the clank of a metal door being rolled up. While Johnson unloaded the money, Smith remained helpless in the van. He didn't know where they were, nor did he know what Johnson intended to do with him. A little more than an hour later, Johnson drove the van to some wooded acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains near Asheville, North Carolina. He forced the captive guard to handcuff himself to a tree and then lie down. Johnson then began to rant about his life.
10 years I worked for that company. Think about that. They didn't pay me my overtime.
Johnson left provisions and warm clothes. Before he drove off, he promised that in 2 days he would call the authorities and inform them of Smith's location.
Don't worry.
The next morning, employees arrived at Loomis Fargo, only to find that they were locked out of the warehouse. They called their supervisor. He arrived with the master set of keys. However, neither keys nor combination allowed them access to the vault. One glance at the monitor of the security camera inside the vault told them why.
Yes, this is supervisor for Loomis Fargo. We have a problem.
They had been robbed. Jacksonville police responded immediately to the call. But they had to wait hours for the technicians to open the vault. A quick tabulation of the missing money put the theft at over $10 million. The FBI immediately stepped in because of the amount involved and because much of it was federally insured money. The federal agents first inquired about missing Loomis personnel. All but Smith, Brown, and Johnson were accounted for. And Johnson's file was gone.
You're missing Johnson?
At the same time in North Carolina, Smith had freed himself. He used a Swiss Army knife to pick the lock on his handcuffs. Then he walked to a nearby road, where he was picked up by a forest ranger.
We were notified here in Jacksonville that Dan Smith had in fact freed himself on Sunday, and many of the pieces of the puzzle began to come together.
Smith led the authorities to Johnson's house. There they found Brown just where Johnson had left him 18 hours earlier.
I got him.
With the 2 Loomis guards safe, the FBI began the manhunt for Johnson. A description of Johnson and the missing van was sent out across the Southeast. The first lead came from an Army sergeant in Asheville, North Carolina, who spotted an abandoned white van. He reported the stolen vehicle with the broken driver's side window and keys in the ignition. Within minutes, 65 police officers and FBI agents descended into the area. But they were too late. Their suspect had bought a one-way ticket out of town. He was safely on his way to freedom.
$7 an hour. That's what Philip Johnson made. Driving a Wells Fargo truck, he hauled millions every day. But you can't be much of a player on $56 a day. $7 an hour.
Musician Al Wells immortalized the caper in song for WOKV.
This is Mike Miller on News Talk 690 WOKV. So the story is this. A security guard named Phil Johnson, who works for Loomis Fargo, instead of going home after his shift, leaves with nearly $20 million.
The improbable heist immediately seized the imagination of local broadcasters.
There were a lot of people in the audience who were really rooting for Philip Johnson on a lot of different levels. A lot of us could identify with him. I mean, how many people out there have worked in a job which they didn't think was ever going to take them any higher? How many people work in a job that they knew was never going to be any more lucrative? How many times do you work for somebody and realize that you know more than your boss knows and you can't understand why they don't go to you for advice? I think those were all the feelings that Philip Johnson had stored up in him. So when he did pull this off, he thumbed his nose at everybody. He said, I'm better than $7 an hour. I'm smarter than you think I am. And guess what? With all the smarts that all of our bosses have, I could do something that you said was fail-safe.
Philip Noel Johnson vanished, along with almost $20 million. More money than any individual in U.S. history.
We had no idea where Phil Johnson had gone. There was indications that he might be up in Canada. There were indications he could be in Mexico or that he could be down in Costa Rica or South America.
The only hope authorities had of finding Johnson lay in the jumble of evidence he had left in his home.
Ironically, it was the chaos that was left behind at his house that created the confusion for law enforcement. There was so much stuff there.
Investigators found Johnson's home to be one of a tormented but brilliant loner. They also discovered a paper trail that took them back 5 years earlier.
Mucho.
As far back as 1992, Johnson began preparing for his crime. Several former roommates told authorities Johnson was difficult to live with.
Stop leaving your crap around in my room.
Investigators discovered that Johnson stole his roommates' identities. He borrowed their driver's licenses and birth certificates to create a long list of aliases. The FBI began to canvass places where Johnson could have dropped off the money in the North Carolina area. Their stops included Mountain Home Mini Storage, a 100-unit storage warehouse 15 miles south of Asheville.
What we did was we put out communications through our network of FBI offices and resident agencies all along that corridor to go to all of the storage facilities within their territory, to show the pictures that we had of Phil Johnson, to describe what had happened, to see if there was anyone that had storage facilities in any of the aliases that we had and whether they could put an alias with a face, and in hopes of finding the money.
Nevertheless, no employees at the Mountain Home Mini Storage recognized pictures of Johnson. The investigators left the facility, even though they were within yards of the locker where Johnson had stopped the van and unloaded the money. For months, the trail grew cold. Authorities had little idea of where Johnson was. They worried that he had safely traveled to Brazil, where the United States had no extradition treaty. But their greater fear was about the money. The question on everybody's mind was, what did Johnson do with the $18.8 million? Some thought he might have buried the money, hoping to come back years in the future when fewer people were looking for him. The FBI worried that he might crate it and ship it out of the country. Others thought that Johnson was ornery enough to burn it all, just to spite Loomis Fargo.
And I think we all believed that if we found the perpetrator, we would find the money, and that the reverse might not necessarily have been true.
5 months later, Johnson made a fateful mistake. For reasons still unclear, he tried to sneak back into the U.S. from Mexico at the Gateway International Bridge in Brownsville, Texas. The American customs officials asked everyone off a northbound bus and began a routine inspection of the passengers. Customs Inspector Virginia Rodriguez walked right past a wanted poster for Johnson as she crossed to the bus, but she didn't recognize him. In the months since the heist, Johnson had lost weight, added a beard, and let his hair grow long. She asked him what he had been doing in Mexico for 2 weeks. He said he had been visiting friends. It was the way he said it that wasn't quite convincing to her. She asked for identification, and Johnson handed over a North Carolina driver's license. On a hunch, Rodriguez gave the license to a fellow customs agent to run through the National Crime Information Center database. Meanwhile, Rodriguez asked to inspect Johnson's bags. When she went through his luggage, she found $10,714 US. Rodriguez knew she was on to something.
Okay, we got a problem with him on ID check. We're gonna have to detain him.
Her fellow agent returned with the news that the name on the license, Roger D. Lauder, was an alias for Philip Johnson. The computer search came back with the flash alert: will extradite from anywhere in the world.
At that time, he was taken into custody, and the FBI office in Brownsville, Texas, was notified that Mr. Johnson had been apprehended.
When we heard that he finally got caught down in Brownsville, Texas, by riding on a bus with fake identification and $10,000 on him, we just shook our heads in amazement and said, we thought this guy was a lot smarter than he turned out to be. It's because he was just an average guy. So when he finally got caught in such an average way, we really shouldn't have expected anything else.
Johnson was arrested and charged with armed robbery, kidnapping, and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. If convicted on all counts, he faced a maximum sentence of life in prison and $1 million fine. Federal officials offered Johnson a deal in exchange for the missing money, but Johnson spurned any cooperation, thinking the money was safely hidden. He was wrong. When Johnson was arrested using the alias of Roger Lauder, FBI detectives discovered that a man using the same name had rented a room in Mexico City. A search of the boarding room yielded a yellow receipt from Mountain Home Mini Storage. At 2 in the morning on September 17th, 1997, FBI agents rolled up the door of the unit Johnson had rented. They found the missing Loomis Fargo money. Johnson left some personal items, including a book on depression and the videotape, If I'm So Wonderful, Why Am I Still Single? From the Brownsville arrest and the Mountain Home Storage Unit, the FBI recovered all but $100,000 of the millions that had been stolen. With the overwhelming evidence, there was little need for a trial. Johnson pled guilty to the charges of kidnapping, money laundering, and violation of interstate commerce under the Hobbs Act. He was sent to a maximum security federal prison, where he currently serves a 25-year sentence. The restitution he owes Loomis Fargo is $59,834.70. It will be paid back through prison labor at a lot less than $7 an hour.